Hello, everybody, and welcome to What's the Story podcast. My name's Danny Murray.
And I'm Graham Merrigan.
All right, and this is WTS 322. So, where do we begin? Where do we begin?
What I don't know. Where do we begin?
Well, look, right. Our guest this week is Hilary McGann, and she is brilliant. She's a journalist that is based in Boston. We had her on in the summer. We got a lovely reaction to her. We absolutely enjoyed chatting to her. And her Instagram, particularly News by Hill, is just brilliant, brilliant, brilliant for giving you very straightforward and easy to understand news and just breaking down what's going on, why it's going on, how it's going on, where it's going on, all the things you need to know. So with the election in the US over, we decided to get Hillary. Now we'll go to Hillary in a minute, but
what are your immediate thoughts of the American US election?
I can sum it up in two words, Meryl.
Well, Donald Trump.
Fucking hell.
It's mad because, like, on the outside looking in, right, and we're kind of judging candidates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the bar, firstly, disclaimer here, in America, I'm of the opinion in the last, well, probably since forever, the bar is very, very low for presidential candidates and with their policies and stuff, you know. And it's about, like, who's probably more fanatical than the other, you know, and MAGA Trump heads are quite fanatical. Democrats, whilst probably no angels, of course, but they don't seem as fanatical. And I mean that from a point of view of, I've been to blue states, and the blue states that I've been to, I've never really saw political merchandise or stuff in public, you know. And then the red states I've been to, there is, you see it everywhere. You see, like, Make America Great Again, blah blah blah. You do see casually on our kind of social media channels, you probably see Irish people saying, you know, Trump's hilarious, Trump is this, he's funny, you know. And he's funny if you're laughing at him, you know. He's not funny if you're laughing with him. A lot of his MAGA people, which I don't really get, a lot of them are hypocrites. A lot of them, you know, when it comes to abortion and stuff, you know, you can guarantee that any of those podcast bros that Trump that was interviewed by, you can guarantee that if their daughter, 14-year-old daughter, got pregnant through a rape or whatever, you can guarantee that they're going to go to a state where abortion is permitted. They're probably going to get on their private jet, and they're going to help their daughter out there, because who wants?
And I mean, look,
and look, a lot of my problem is with their supporters in this specific topic, and a lot of the topics with minorities is, how do they think a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old is too young to know gay people exist or the LGBT people exist, but not old enough to be forced to carry a baby?
It's a very, very, very complex divide over there, and I don't know. You know, I think
you get my point, though. You get my point.
No, I absolutely get your point, but I don't know why. I can't necessarily understand the point of view where, like, people don't have the mindset of if this then that, and like, the thing I'm struggling with after this election is, and I mean, look, it is what it is, right? But it's just that whole thing for me of how we've got to this point where a convicted felon, he a sexual abuser,
he's been impeached,
twice impeached, 6 times bankrupt, like, just, you know, known racist, the list is endless about
Mm.
why his character is so deplorable and why he, as a person, is just completely unlikable. And like in any other situation in life, you just wouldn't think this guy could win any kind of anything where it required people to vote for him. And
Mm.
yet here we are. And it's because he taps into something that you and I can't quite, it's not tangible, right? It's not a tangible thing that you can understand, that you can fathom. And the mental gymnastics that are needed to say a 14-year-old can't tell the difference, but or shouldn't need to know or understand or get that information about gay people or transgender people or anything like that. But if they get pregnant through absolute no fault of their own or otherwise, they have to carry that baby to term. They have to become a mother. They have to understand motherhood. They have to. I can't understand.
But see,
Uh,
my point being, and it's probably been a bit tetchy or whatever, but you say, well, people, on this side of the pond who find Trump hilarious and think he's deadly and think he's, like that part of it there is a true story of the people who are following him. That's the
yeah,
truth. That's the true story of what his policies are going to be. He's going to appoint an anti-vaxxer for the Department of Health.
like look, yeah, look, all that kind of stuff
It's
is
just mental.
it's bizarre. But I think like when
But we're
you,
also allowed to say that the Democrats are fucking mad as well. Like,
yeah, of course, yeah. Look, and it's the thing, right? Look, I mean, all politics is mad at the end of the day, and I don't know. I like uh, when I said my reaction was fucking hell. It was more so out of just bewilderment as to what
yeah,
comes next than anything else. The result is the result, right? But to your point earlier about kind of that identity politics that seems very prevalent in America, you're either red or you're blue, right? There's no room for that now. There's very little room for anything else. You're either red or you're blue. I do think it's fascinating. I don't think it's a coincidence rather that such identity politics exists in a place where from an early age, every single day in school, you pledge allegiance to a flag. You you put all these things ahead of anything else. And it look for want of a better term, it's quite cultish, you know?
but yeah, it's quite cultish. But this is why I have a huge problem with us, and I've been guilty of it over the years. I like to think I've been less guilty of it as I've got older. But this is why I find it toxic that we are so influenced by American culture.
Yeah.
Like America is not the flag bearer in any of this. Like they're like it's just bizarre to me that they have such a stronghold over Western European society. Now, the Democrats think life is Hollywood, and they got so many celebrity endorsements. Do you get me?
yeah, and like I don't know. I think like years and years ago, celebrity endorsements mattered more than they do now because now celebrities are in your pocket 24/7, right?
Yeah.
You follow every move, you follow everything about their lives, you know everything about the Kardashians, you know everything about your favorite singer. You have 24-hour access to their lives through stuff that they're posting and they're sharing with you. You
Mm.
know, 40 years ago when Ronald Reagan was running for president or whatever in the 80s, I'm getting me years wrong here. Was Reagan I think he was. Reagan 84?
Was he? Yeah, he was.
The originator of Make America Great Again wasn't a Trump one. That's a Reagan thing. Anyway, my point being that like back
And he
then
was an actor as well.
he was, but the only access you had to celebrities back then was when they appeared on your television screen, when they appeared in your newspaper, or when you got to see them in a concert or in a movie.
Yeah.
Right? It's completely different. So back then when you didn't have all this information and know everything about them and everything else, a political endorsement probably did mean something more because it was this moment of like, I'm getting to know, oh my God, if he likes them, then I should like them. Whereas now, like, it doesn't carry the same weight. It doesn't carry the same, and like we talked to Hillary a little bit about it in terms of like Trump going on the podcasts, and we'll go to that conversation shortly because you and I are rambling.
Yeah.
One of the things I forgot to say when we were talking to her, and one of the things that I think is really, really important, e- even with all those celebrity endorsements and everything else, the exit poll, one of the most interesting things in the exit poll, showed that 80% of voters had their mind made up by September.
80%.
Kamala Harris only entered the race in August.
That's mental, isn't it?
So all that, so 3% made their mind up in the 48 hours before the election, and a further 3% made their mind up in the week before the election. That's 6%. Now, in a close election, like 2020, for example, that 6% is fucking huge, and it's
Mm.
very important. This was a blowout. This
Uh,
was out and out blowout. This was like the Democrats didn't land a glove in this election. Now, the
mm.
House, as we're
Do you
recording, the
think
House,
Biden would have?
no, Biden would have been worse. Biden, make no mistake about it. Kamala Harris outperformed what Joe Biden would have done, unquestionably. From that debate between him and Trump,
Yeah, it was a train wreck.
that was the end. That was like I mentioned Ronald Reagan a minute ago. Ronald Reagan, famous for having like one of the most incredible election results ever. I think only one state voted against him. Talk about unanimous.
Mm.
Like we could have been in that territory had Biden like genuinely well, no, not in modern politics. Too many blue states, red states. But my point being that it would have been an absolute just brain wreck had Joe Biden stayed. And I mean that in the most respectful way I can to an 80-something-year-old man who's given his life to politics, like him or loathe him, he has. But yeah, look, you and I are rambling, and at this
Yeah.
stage, we've already probably lost a listener or two because they're like, I can't. So
Let's go to Hillary.
let's bring in the brilliant Hilary McGann. And I'm absolutely delighted to say welcome back to Hilary now. Hilary, how are you?
I'm good. Maybe a little bit sleep deprived, but I'm good and I'm really, really happy to be back on with you guys. I adored our chat over the summer. It's hard to believe we are already in November.
I know, it's mad. Now, before we get into what we're going to get into, right? Let's because people are probably a little bit fatigued already at this stage. Like it's only 48 hours after the election or whatever. But let's start off with something a little bit more wholesome, right? The last time you had a chat with us, you gave us info, which we absolutely loved, right? We need a puppy update, Hilary.
She's
Right.
right here
No
behind
way.
me. Where is she? Oh, can I see her?
My
Brie.
dog legged it just before.
She is absolute perfection, I have to say. My
Okay.
husband will text me during the day now and he's like, how's Brie? Is all okay? I'm like, she's amazing. She's perfect. She's the best thing. And I keep saying, I'm like, she's the best thing I ever did. And Sam's like, the best thing that we ever did. Like he was like, it's actually borderline offensive now. I mean, I'm so insufferable. Over the summer, it was actually shortly after, it was a few days after I was chatting to you guys. I was up with a friend and she was chatting to me about how she wants, and now I will say, disclaimer, I'd had about 3 Aperol spritzes, and she was talking to me about how she wanted to start the potty training process with her son. And me being me, I was like, listen, you just have to stay consistent with it. It's tough, but you got to stay consistent. And my husband was like, I'm sorry, she is talking about her son. You have a puppy. Like, who do you think you are giving advice?
It's
Just
knowledge transfer. It's knowledge transfer. It's all good.
Knowledge transfer. I love it.
That's very diplomatic
Delighted,
of you, Denny.
delighted to hear that she's doing well and that she still remains the best thing that you, Hilary, that you ever did. That's and then the second bit was you also told us that your dad loves checking in on your followers. Is he happy with your progress?
He is. He's funny because he actually came to visit 2 weeks ago, and he came to visit his granddaughter Brie. He's waited long enough for a grandchild. He was like, he flew in for 48 hours to Boston, and one of the nights we went to the bar together. And I was chatting about deep dives I was planning to do after the election. Like, I think I was just doing daily content with the election, but then I really want to get into some deep dives.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, and I really feel like every time you do a deep dive, your numbers go up. And next thing he gets his phone out and he has this notes file where he has actually documented those numbers. And you can see, and I had no idea. So he's like, yeah, so like, you started the year, you were on 27,000 and we're up to 45 now. Like all this analysis.
We're up.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a big we as well.
So what we'll do, if people want to, one, make your dad happy, but also get occasional glimpses of Brie and get deep dives, Newsboy Hill is the place to go.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Right. Okay. That's enough procrastinating. Where do we start?
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
How's America now? I've a couple of friends, American friends, that have texted me over the course of the last few days, and they have kind of sent me screen grabs of conversations they're having with their friends, and
Hmm.
it's fairly doom and gloom and chaotic. Um, I mean, retrospectively, the last Trump, from a foreign policy point of view, because we're in Ireland, obviously, and we don't get to see
Hmm.
the domestic kind of changes. Was Trump that bad in his last term, and is he going to be worse in this term? Because they are, particularly women, um, are a bit scared, and they keep quoting the Project 2025 stuff.
Yeah, but when you say women are scared and you cite Project 2025, that's a lot of domestic policy. So that's not
Mm,
necessarily foreign policy, to be honest with you. And look, I think I'm hearing a mixed bag because I try and live my life in a way that I don't ever assume how somebody votes. I don't assume how anyone feels. And I really touched on this kind of last week, saying I think, if I was living in Ireland, I would have a different perspective in many ways. But living here, my husband and I, our takeaway in the last 18 months was that we were kind of taken aback by the amount of people that we have met that I guarantee you would sit in a bar with and say, this person looks progressive and talks progressive, open minded, very loving to everybody, really chilled out kind of person. They voted for Trump. And
Mm.
so my point of that is not to weigh in on whether or not they were right or wrong. It's to say that there is a disconnect, a huge disconnect between the MAGA interpretation and portrayal of somebody in the media versus what I have seen really on the ground. And I'm just trying to navigate that in a way that's respectful to everybody. I mean, even in the sense of like the last kind of 3 weeks, there was a lot of tension here, and I totally understand that. And all I would ever say to people is, look, I hope you get the result that you want, because it's not, I don't try and weigh in. Like, I'm a journalist, I'm not an activist. And I was really fascinated watching the polls in this election. In a way, I kind of always felt Trump was well within a chance of winning. I never expected a mandate like quite as strong as that he received. I really did not anticipate that people in Ireland would be waking up Wednesday morning with the result. I thought it might play out over a few days. But I think what's really interesting, and okay, I'm going to ramble here a little bit, but the only time that I felt, oh, I don't know that Trump's going to win this is I think he's lost this. It was after the Madison Square Garden rally, because I
Mm.
felt the tone of that was so dark. It wasn't about what you were going to do for the country. It was about division. It was really like disrespectful to a lot of different people. I felt, oh, I don't know what's going to come out of this. But what I always felt was with the polls, they were showing consistently, like across the board, different sources were showing this is so close. This is kind of neck and neck in those key seven battleground states. And the reason I thought that benefited Donald Trump is because you meet a Kamala Harris supporter and they will tell you that they're a Harris supporter. They will actually bring that up. They'll be the ones to initiate it. You don't have to ask. They will say that, and they will say it really, really proudly. And yet, a lot of Donald Trump supporters, it might be after two gin tonics. They'll be like, well, and so my
Yes.
point was, if the polls are saying it's that close, where is that chunk of people that still don't feel comfortable owning the fact that they would prefer Donald Trump?
The
So
shy Trump vote. Yeah.
yeah, and I think maybe that's the case. And I mean, not to be all Richard Nixon here, but like that silent majority really did go to the polls on Tuesday.
Absolutely. And I'm delighted you brought that up because it's something that I've been saying to Mero. Like that, we were looking at the polls, and even over the weekend, Mero sent me a screen grab of, was it the Seltzer poll or whatever one it was,
yeah.
and I was still like, just Trump underpolls constantly. He underpolls and underpolls because of that
Mhm.
exact thing that you were saying, Hillary. That like people, a lot of people wouldn't exactly be all that kind of vocal about saying I'm a Trump guy or I'm a Trump gal or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
Um, and that's kind of what we watched play out in this election. But I think it's interesting as well in terms of you look at the demographics, right? And the whole thing in the build up to election day was women are coming out to vote for Kamala. Women are going to win this election for Kamala.
Mhm.
The the voting demographics, particularly with suburban white women,
Mhm.
don't show that. And it's I think the thing that's interested me the most in the aftermath is exactly what you're saying. That notion of what is a Trump voter? Because after this election, it seems like it's anybody, it's everybody, it's just people who felt they needed a change. And
Mhm.
fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what way you look at it, Trump is the vehicle of that change this time around.
Yeah, and I think there's a media pundit called Alyssa Farah Griffin, and she is on The View, right? So she's a conservative woman, and she actually served in the last Trump administration. I think actually she was more with Mike Pence kind of day to day, but she is now one of the most vocal critics against Donald Trump. And I thought she made a really interesting point the other day that maybe in hindsight, and look, I'm not trying to like say one team was all perfect and the other there, but there has to be reflections back. And I do wonder if maybe the Democrats lean too heavily on the idea that because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the decision to put it back to the individual states, they thought there would be a bigger turnout for that. She made the point that actually they did turn out, but they turned out in the 2022 midterms because that was kind of 4 or 5 months off the back of that happening. And she made the point of, a lot of the women that do believe in the right to a choice and were really passionate about it in 2022 might now live in a more liberal leaning state. And are they really going to decide their vote based on a woman in Alabama if they live in New York, for example? I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but I just thought it was an interesting point that maybe they had weighed too heavily on the idea that people would do that. And I think also too, it's interesting in the sense of, we've weighed in a lot on Black voters, on Latino voters, on the gender breakdowns. Maybe there needs to be a more wholesome approach of looking at them as just voters. 46% of Latino voters voted for Donald Trump. They have the same priorities as some white families. It's like, can they pay their bills? Can they pay for the education of their children? Do they have private healthcare or access to healthcare? And so I think we need to go beyond, the color of somebody's skin or their age or their gender. It's like, what are their priorities? And I think as well, like, I'm not a minority and I'm very conscious of that. And I'm very, very aware of that. But I don't think I would like the feeling of being put into a box and expected to vote a certain way. I mean, not Donald Trump, Joe Biden in 2020, when he was running, he received a lot of pushback for a comment that he made that I think was an innocent, like well-intended comment. But he was speaking on a radio interview, and he said, look, if you're not voting for me, you're not Black. I was like, well, no, actually, I don't have to vote for you because I'm Black. That shouldn't be the case. And so, sorry, I'm conscious I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here.
No, that's right. No, that's perfect.
I do find it just fascinating to assess. And like, Meryl, to the point that you made earlier, I totally understand that a lot of women in the country are feeling really uncertain about the future. But I just don't think that there was as many voters that showed up for the polls about that than the Democrats would have foreseen or thought.
Yeah, because on the outside looking in, I think we touched on it in July. I was, and even in the last couple of weeks, as me and Danny are political geeks, like, especially with elections.
Can I caveat that real quick?
Yeah.
We're political geeks who know nothing. Like, we'll sit there and we'll look at everything.
No, you know so much.
Well, I was just going to say,
scheme of things, like,
I was just going to say, the caveat being on the outside looking in, I was convinced that this potentially was going to be almost treated like an abortion referendum as such. But that didn't really appear to come across. It's like,
I think that's to Hillary's point, though, that
I think that actually happened in 2022.
Yeah.
Because actually, you think about the midterms, oftentimes the midterms really don't do well for the party that is in the presidency, that's in the White House. So a lot of people were expecting that actually Donald Trump's candidates were going to do really well. They did not at all. They also thought that Joe Biden was going to really, lose support in the House and in the Senate. He didn't. They did so much better than they thought. And I think a lot of that came to Roe v. Wade. And so it's not that I don't understand it, but I think Democrats then leaned too heavily on that and thought two years later that was going to be the same passionate feeling when people came to the polls.
Yeah. There's nobody, I'm with all the commentary I've watched over the last 6-7 months, and even vox pops of Americans, a lot of the voters were alienated by both parties, particularly working class people that they don't feel represented or seen. I mean, particularly with the Democrats, are they focusing too much on Hollywood and celebrity endorsements? Because I find that quite patronizing that they think, oh, Billie Eilish has just said Kamala Harris, she's going to vote for her. Taylor Swift, Bruce Springsteen. Do they need to
Don't bring
get
Bruce
back?
Springsteen into this, Grant, please.
Do they need to get back to reality and get on the ground with working class voters?
I I think a lot of that is true. You know, it's not that I don't think that it's not always bad when a celebrity weighs in and they've every right to weigh in and be as politically passionate as anybody else. But do I feel like being lectured to by somebody that lives in a $20 million house in Hollywood if I'm struggling on minimum wage in Alabama? No, I don't.
Yeah,
I
Exactly.
don't.
It's
I don't.
nuts
And
to me.
actually, can I just say what I think is one of the most fascinating things because you guys are political geeks. I'm a history geek, loud and proud, okay? And I always think about the long term of this, of kind of like, you know, in 30 years' time, how are we going to look back on this? Because
yeah.
it won't be the day-to-day updates. It won't be the madness of the breaking news during Trump's first term. It'll be just a summary. And what will the summary be? And I think one part of that is going to be the fact that a man who lived in a rather tacky apartment that was full of gold on Fifth Avenue resonated more with working class voters in the middle of the country, more than Democrats could. And to be fair to Joe Biden, like Joe Biden did not grow up wealthy. He was not from a place of privilege. He worked really hard. Same with Kamala Harris, well educated, did not grow up with a load of money. What is it that they are not connecting with those voters? And they need to look at themselves and figure that out because it is something that Donald Trump has achieved, whether we like the method and way in the way he's done it or not. He has done it.
And
Yeah, yeah.
I think that is a really, really good point, right? So
Oh,
if
thank you.
you look at it, no, but it is right because if you look at it, even just at like
It's a very fair reflection. Like,
even just in the run up to the campaign, right? If you look at what the Democrats were doing, and if you look, and I'm not trying to turn this into kind of like everything that the Dems got wrong, right? Because like, what good is that going to do? It's up to them to do their
Yeah,
own
yeah, yeah.
post-mortem,
Yeah.
draw their own conclusions, and see how they're going to move on to midterms in 2 years, and then the big one in 4 years. But
Mm-hmm.
like, we almost laughed at the fact that Trump was doing things like Theo Vaughn, that he was going on flagrant with Andrew Schultz, that he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and we're sitting there and we're like, what the fuck is the world coming to that these podcasters are? But the reality is the game has shifted now. So when you're talking about how they resonate and how they connect with voters, Trump tapped into the audience and like the medium is the message, right? So he tapped into that. Whereas the Democrats were out hooting and hollering and making a big song and dance about the fact that their ground game was so good and that they were knocking on all these doors. And 2024, if somebody knocks on my door, I check my Ring doorbell to see if I want to open it before I open it. I don't answer calls from numbers I don't recognize. I do listen to podcasts. I do consume media that isn't just, 24-hour news channels. Like, I think Trump resonated because he managed to cut through the noise and find his way into their ears. Like,
I think you're absolutely spot on. And actually, there was a really good point made in an interview that I listened to way earlier this year. I want to say it was about February or something. And they were basically making the point that in the 2008 election, it was the election of YouTube. Because really, it was the first time that there was a lot of political commentary that was happening on YouTube, that a lot of interviews were going straight to there, that a lot of people weren't watching, waiting 8 p.m. to watch the news. They were watching that segment then on YouTube. You look at the election in 2016, and it was the election of Twitter. Really, to be totally honest with you. And I think people will look back at 2024 and say it was the election of podcasts. And I think it is absolutely fascinating because, I piss people off because I try and be so impartial. And I always say that I won't be able to do my job if I can't understand the perspective of somebody else. I just won't be able to be a good journalist. It's impossible.
God forbid a journalist be impartial. Like, Jesus.
I mean, but that's the whole point. Is like, why have we blurred that line? But that is another rant I can go on. I mean,
go for
why
it.
have we blurred that line? I mean, I always say to people, because well-intended people will write to me and say, you need to do this. History won't be kind. They won't be kind to you. And I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. Activism is never supposed to influence journalism. Journalism is supposed to inspire activism. And we've got it the wrong way around for some reason. It is not my job to tell you how to think, feel, or vote. It is my job to assess the latest headlines and tell you what I think you need to know so you can make your own informed decision. That is all.
So,
But
all right,
yeah,
go
go
on, go
on.
on. No,
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 go on, go
no.
on.
I'm coming across you. I'm coming across you. Go.
No, no, you're not. I mean, I didn't even have a proper train of thought, really. I'm going from one ramble to the next. But I just think going back to the point about the podcast, I'm somebody, by the way, like I absolutely support the need for mainstream media. I worked at CNN. It was my dream job. I absolutely respect those institutions in many ways. And I look at it this way. People say, oh, they're anti-mainstream media. They want citizen journalism. And they say, like, we want more of what you're doing. And I'm like, that's a lovely compliment. Thank you very much. But all I'm doing is bridging a gap. And the investigations that are carried out by huge legacy media brands are enormous financial and time investment, one that I will never have. And they are the investigations that change government legislation, that get people out protesting, that change people's lives. Like, I don't want to lose sight of that. But I would also say that if you look from a political campaign point of view, Joe Rogan podcast, Theo Von, the podcast that you mentioned, they all have 5 times the amount of views that you're going to get rather than going on CNN. And the reality is CNN, and I don't blame the anchors for this, it's just the way the media is structured. They give you a 7-minute interview and they want to get 2 sound bites out of it. That's all they need. They want that and they need that. Whereas I think people are saying, I want to hear who this person is. Like, I want a conversation. And I think it's an extraordinary thing that Joe Rogan can do a 3 hour long podcast and have 27 million views in 48 hours. That's telling you something.
Bananas, yeah.
But it's about that unscripted, like, it's not question after question. It's like what you guys do so well. It's just, let's have a conversation. And I will say, to be honest with you, I think a lot of the conversation around podcasts will naturally go more positively towards Donald Trump and JD Vance, just because of the sheer volume that they did. And I think they were well received within their base. But if you listen to Call Her Daddy, Kamala Harris did an interview with her.
Yeah.
I think it was back like mid-September or something. And I thought it was, without a doubt, throughout the campaign, the best media appearance that Kamala Harris did. And it was such frustration. I was like, why aren't you doing more of this? This is a no-brainer. It was the first chance you really felt like this was really, truly unscripted. She spoke about why she became a prosecutor. It was because of a very, very good friend of her came to her and said she was being sexually abused at home. And I just thought, wow, like, good for you that you were so passionate about something in that way. You don't get that in an NBC News interview. No. You get that in 60 Minutes because there's a huge pressure there. And so I wonder, will they look back and regret that? And I think going forward in political campaigns, it's going to be podcast after podcast after podcast.
I think so. I think, like,
yours.
100%.
100%. I don't know about that. But, like, I know because Bernie Sanders did it before as well, right? He's done a couple of podcast rounds and that kind of stuff. And, like, I think for me, and I remember saying this to you, Mero, like, if I were in Camp Kamala and I was advising, I'd have been like, I'm not saying I'm a fan of Joe Rogan and like that, but I'd been like, do Rogan and do it before the other one. If you do Rogan before Trump, then everything he says, they're going to balance again. Whereas if you go on after him, you're not the name on the marquee here. Like,
yeah. And I will always wonder, would Joe Rogan have endorsed Trump the night before the election had Kamala Harris come on?
Yeah.
And I also think as well, now, I'm not going to tell anyone how to think, but Joe Rogan was a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to agree with everything everybody says. The guy speaks for 3 hours multiple times a week. Everybody, if they did that, is going to have very controversial things. Something's going to come out. Yeah. But he's not a MAGA head. He did not like Donald Trump for a long time. And so I don't think it was an endorsement of Donald Trump as a person. I think it was an endorsement of his
he came on my podcast
campaign. It was I actually think it was Elon Musk who convinced him, not Donald Trump, because I watched the Donald Trump interview he did, and at one point Donald Trump was saying, we didn't lose in 2020, and Joe Rogan just starts laughing at him.
Yeah,
it was
he makes a comment. And I think at one point, like, Trump was going way, and he's like, okay, hang on, the weave is getting to, and like,
yeah.
Like, I was surprised that Trump done 3 hours, to be honest with you. Like, I generally didn't think he would, but, I think though the interesting thing with it, as you said, though, is that, like, historically, even Elon Musk, right, historically was a Democrat and whatever. And I think there's, now absolutely no time for Elon Musk. I think he's a flute, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think you made a good point as well in terms of that Rogan stance, that maybe it's that he's not MAGA, but it's just, either by Trump going on his podcast or by the campaign he ran, he was convinced. And of all the campaign ads and of all the different, I'm Donald Trump and I endorse this message, I'm Kamala Harris and I endorse this message, ads that I saw throughout the campaign,
Mm-hmm.
the one that I thought was the most powerful it was three kind of elderly women sitting in a cafe talking about how much they hate Donald Trump, the man, but they're voting for him because the economy, because this. And I thought that message will resonate with a lot more people than a lot of the other stuff that we'd seen. And it's just, when you said about Rogan, I just thought that was interesting in terms of, I wondered that a lot more people tap into that. I can't stand the man.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I'm voting for him.
Yeah, I hear
And
you.
see,
And I think it was also, go on, sorry.
No, go here. You go.
No. All I was just going to say is that in a way, I wonder, had Elon Musk not done that interview, would he have? I wonder if Kamala Harris had done the interview, and if Elon Musk hadn't done the interview, would we have ended up with the endorsement? Because the other viral clip from JD Vance's interview with Joe Rogan was JD Vance saying how we've got women now on social media that are celebrating their abortions, and he pushed back quite heavily on that. He was like, I don't think we've got women on social media. So, Joe Rogan wasn't just being like, please come on, and I'm not going to challenge anything at all, but also he's not beholden to a media standard in the sense of like, you know what I mean? It's not, he doesn't have to fact check. He just is having a conversation, and people for whatever reason are leaning more towards that.
Well, the credit to a lot of the credit. Now, I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I did back when he first kind of started, but he was personally, he just annoyed the shit out of me. But the main kind of person that should be credited for fact checking for Joe Rogan is the producer Jamie, because a lot of the time he will contradict them. He will bring him up. But the bad thing about all of it is that the damage is done because the initial viral clip has already gone viral by about 45 million people, and on a 3-second clip. So when producer Jamie has corrected them and fact checked them, that clip's like 100,000 views. So nobody has seen it. I don't disagree with what either of you have said here, but I find it deeply, deeply depressing that people like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, former professional wrestler, The Undertaker, David Ramsey, all these, Theo Van Dam, whatever his name is, I find it deeply unsettling that these people are so influential to a political vote and political discourse, because a lot of things in America that are wrong, that affect working class and middle class people, none of these people are affected by it. None of them at all. They're all gazillionaires. They don't give a shit, so I find that element, which I of course don't disagree, because what both of you have said is completely factual. And it was the podcast election. I think that's brilliant, Hilary. It certainly is. But it's so deeply depressing that these people that we've named are so influential on voters. I find it disgusting.
Well, I think as well there could be, and there should be, a wider conversation about influence in politics. And just to specify just on America for a sec, you're right in the sense of, it's billionaires. It was Bill Gates giving 50 million to Kamala Harris. It was Elon Musk, donating, millions every single month to a super PAC supporting Donald Trump and then doing the giveaway. But I also think as well, another point that I don't think is going to get an awful lot of attention, and I saw this tweet today that I just thought was absolutely fascinating, and it speaks to a point about influence in US politics. And it was from AIPAC, which is the Israeli lobby in the US. And they have tweeted today, and I'm going to read it to you. AIPAC endorsed 362 candidates. This is for both the House and the Senate, and won in every primary we had a candidate on the ballot. That's 362 candidates. And it goes on to say, we helped our friends win and defeated 11 anti-Israel candidates. Being pro-Israel is good policy and good politics. That's fascinating.
That's fascinating. And what is more fascinating about that in the context of people's voting patterns, On Drive Time with Cormac and Sarah McInerney earlier in the week. They did Vox Pox. They had a reporter in Michigan, I think. Sorry, I can't remember if it was Michigan, but she was a brilliant reporter. And she was just doing Vox Pops on the ground to see what people are going to vote. She interviewed a Palestinian man from his family were from Gaza, and he lost 4 or 5 members of his family, and he was still voting Donald Trump. Now, that does not make sense to me. Now, having said that, voting Kamala Harris doesn't make sense to me in the context as well because of the funding of it and the fake kind of promises of a ceasefire over the last 11 months. But Donald Trump, like Benjamin Netanyahu, is over the moon that Donald Trump won that election and not Kamala Harris. So I thought that, and they interviewed 3 or 4 people from the Lebanon, from Palestine, and they were all in Trump's corner.
I think, but it goes back to the point that I made earlier of I wouldn't be able to do my job if I wasn't able to try and put myself in the shoes of somebody else. And if I lost 4 or 5 members of my family that were killed by American bombs, let's be real, that were sold billions of support, unconditional support to Israel, unconditional aid sent in over and over and over again. You had 100 days since October 7th attack, and Joe Biden put out a statement, did not mention the word Palestinian, did not mention the word Gaza. So if I had family members there and I lost 5 family members, I don't feel obliged to support that administration. And I think they saw enough with Kamala Harris to feel like it was going to be a continuation on. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that I think Donald Trump is going to come in and be pro-Palestinian and support the Palestinian people. I think for them, they feel it's a risk worth taking. This is how bad it is. Can it get worse? Like, can it get worse? I'm not saying whether or not they're right. I'm just trying to say, I think also there was a sense of resentment. I have a friend they're both American, but they're Palestinian American, and she's Lebanese American. Her husband's Palestinian American. And I had a big chat with her about this, and I asked her honestly, and she said, I feel really resentful that I'm being told I need to give my support to this candidate, that it's on me whether or not Donald Trump gets back in. No, earn the vote, be compassionate, be humane. And I think it's not just really about the presidency. It's like the point I made there about AIPAC. They didn't just endorse 362 candidates, they funded them. So those guys have all gotten into Congress now. Do we think that they're going to have a nuanced conversation about what's happening in the Middle East? Do we think that they're going to prioritize the lives of Palestinian people over Israeli policy and support to Israel? No. And I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know, honestly, Mero. I think you make a really good point. Like, I don't disagree with you. I just say that there's a layer beyond it. And if I lost 5 family members, I would have a different view. And I think I'd be very defensive. I'd be saying, I don't need to be told how to vote any certain way. There is a brilliant book.
Absolutely.
There's a brilliant book called Trump's Peace, and it's by Barack Ravid, who's an excellent journalist. He is the definition, in my opinion, of somebody who is, I would say he is a journalist who happens to be Israeli. He's not an Israeli journalist. Like, he holds their feet to the fire like everybody else. He's so excellent. His sourcing is unbelievable. And he wrote this book, Trump's Peace, and it's about the Abraham Accords and the access that he had. I mean, it's just unbelievable how well sourced it is. But there was a really interesting line. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, Trump is the most pro-Israel president ever. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, he did a lot of things, don't get me wrong. But what I was so fascinated by was Barack Ravid said that basically at the beginning of the negotiations, he almost suggested that Donald Trump was kind of taken aback by how much more he liked Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinians than he did Donald Trump. And the way he actually, Netanyahu, sorry. And the way he actually promoted the book was putting out, it was really smart. He put out this audio recording of Donald Trump that leaked where he's on a phone call and he's basically like, Netanyahu, like, fuck you, basically, because Netanyahu recognized the results of the 2020 election. And so don't get me wrong, like, Netanyahu, you're absolutely right, is thrilled. But I just thought that was fascinating. And I would say it's worth a read, given the fact that I think what's going on in the Middle East is so important to be aware of. and it might just provide like helpful insight into what happened and what may happen, I guess.
I think in that situation of those voters, I would have probably voted for Jill Stein,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
third candidate.
Yeah,
I
but
know
that was a vote for Donald Trump, though, really.
probably, yeah. She only
You
got
know,
700,000 votes, but I think consciously I wouldn't be able
yeah,
to vote for the Republicans in that situation. And obviously the Democrats are no good when it comes to Israel Palestine. But yeah, it was just interesting, the demographics of what you were probably, me personally, were probably assuming, and I was completely wrong.
do you know what? I don't think you're assuming wrong at all. I just think it's been really interesting living here. And I live in Boston. Like, I live in a city that is blue. It's a blue city in general. And I think maybe that's why I was so surprised, and why I feel like I've learned an awful lot, because it's not as royally blue as I would have thought it is.
Oh, really?
And no, not at all. And I actually think, I cannot tell you how many people, and I don't know the answer as to why, I cannot tell you how many people I have met that I know in my heart and soul voted for Barack Obama twice and voted for Trump.
Yeah.
It's nuts, isn't it?
It is.
But that's why politics is so fascinating. And I also think, like, what I'm always fascinated with as well is the connection to things that are happening outside of the US and the impact that they have. Like you mentioned, Gaza, you know?
Yeah, and it's I do want to ask you about something, because I'm conscious of time as well, right? And I do want to ask you about something
Well,
else.
don't worry on my end, but whatever
We,
suits.
before we shift away from it, though, you actually had an episode on your podcast recently booked in, and it was about the 100 Years War in Palestine, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a brilliant guest.
Yeah.
Well,
Tell us just a little bit about that.
so I had the pleasure and privilege, really, of having Rashid Khalidi. He is a professor at Columbia University, just recently retired. He was the head of modern Arab history. And he wrote this book, 100 Years War in Palestine. And it came out quite a few years ago, but off the back, within, I think, 2 weeks of October 7th coming out, within 2 weeks of October 7th occurring, it went back up in the bestseller list. And what is really interesting about his book, now don't get me wrong, it is a heavy book to read. It's not a light book. It's not a holiday read. But I think it's a really, really important one, because sometimes I find history books quite tough to really wrap my head around. What's really different about this, in my opinion, is that it's so injected with so much of his family history. And either he or an ancestor of his was actually at so many pivotal moments. Like, for example, his great uncle was the last Arab mayor of Jerusalem. And I think it was in 1899 that he wrote to Theodor Herzl, who was the father of modern Zionism, warning him, and I think really empathized with the anti-Semitism in Europe that a lot of Jews were experiencing, but warned him, was like, there is a people here. Like, you cannot try and set up another country in Palestine. And it was really, he starts the book that way. And I think it's really chilling to kind of hear that, knowing what we've seen over the last year and really over the last few decades, but in particular over the last year. And, you know, he was one of the negotiators for the Palestinians in the past, Rashid himself. He just has really, really interesting insights. And I think he made a really interesting point too about US support, because he was born in America. So he's Palestinian American. And I said to him, you know, how do you feel about your government? And let's be real, like, it's a bipartisan, it's one of the few things that are bipartisan in the US, is the fact that there is just unconditional support, whether it's a Democrat or Republican administration. And I said, you know, one of the things that I hear over and over and over again is Israel has the right to defend itself. It's how every response starts. But he had a really interesting point to make. And he said, but in order to sell the weapons, it has to be for defensive purposes. There are genuine laws around that. And I think because we're seeing this all unfold on social media and in 4K, we forget that there are laws, there are rules. War is not supposed to be lawless. And, you know, there's supposed to be proportionality. And we've kind of lost all of that. And I think it was just a really obvious point once he made it, but a really important point just to be reminded of all the same.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you the last time and I forgot. Do you know what I find particularly crazy when the contrast of Irish politics, and even probably English politics to American politics, the political party merchandise that the public wear. Like, can you
I
imagine
know.
going around Ireland with a Fianna Fáil hoodie or a Sinn Féin baseball cap, or do you know?
No, 100%.
It's such a
But I
mad
also,
culture for that, isn't it?
but I also actually, do you know what? It's funny because Dad and I were laughing about it a few months ago because we were up in Cape Cod over the summer, and like every second home has, I mean, it's like a movie, right? It has the hydrangeas and the cut lawn and the white picket fence, but it also, they all wave their American flag outside. And I was saying to Dad, I was like, isn't it funny that like that never happened in Ireland? He was like, Hill, if you had an Irish flag outside your house, they thought you were in the IRA. Like, why
Yes,
would
yeah.
you?
Yeah.
It's so different, you know, and so it's just so different culturally. And you're absolutely right, but they love merchandise. It's not just political. I mean, Harvard University, like, I mean, imagine I was walking around with a UL, like,
Yeah.
it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Trinity, maybe that's kind of a cool hoodie, I will say, but
You do get
but
some people with the university merchandise, but I can't imagine in my estate, for example, people putting garden stuff up with like vote Simon Harris #1
mm.
or vote Mary Lou McDonald #1. Well, I mean, you might get that
But
in my house.
I also think as well, like, and I don't know how you guys grew up, but my parents always said like it's so important that you vote, but it's not an obligation to tell people how you vote. I never knew
Mhm.
really how my parents voted, and it wasn't really part of the conversation. It was more that you did vote. And I
Mm.
think also too, if you think about that, it's because for such a long time in Ireland, the two main parties were Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and both kind of slightly to the right of centre. And so really ideologically, what was the difference in many ways? Like
Yeah,
if you read just a policy sheet and you didn't know what party it belonged to, I can't say for definite I would know in general which party it was. Like I'm
the
talking about like
difference.
a real generalization, like a real generalization. Whereas with America, and I think to an extent to the UK too, if you compare Conservatives and Labour, it's a much bigger difference. It's a much bigger cultural difference in
Yeah.
like what you believe in and who you think you are. So maybe that's why it's much more open.
Mm.
And I will say also as well, I said earlier about how, in the last few weeks, I would just say to people, if they brought up the election at all, I was like, don't talk religion, don't talk politics. So I would always say, I hope you're happy with the outcome of the election. And what I found, I was laughing to my husband, I found that if they were a Harris supporter, they would be like, just so you know, like I'm absolutely supporting Harris. And then, and so if they turned to me and they're like, thank you very much, I was like, Trump, 100%. They don't say it. So I just thought that was my funny little case study, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
That's gas.
it is fascinating. I think it's always it's the thing I say in Ireland all the time is you don't have to wait long to know if somebody votes Sinn Féin. They'll tell you. They
Yeah,
will tell
yeah,
you.
yeah.
You know,
Do they?
you do. So
I don't. I tell you, I vote people before
How are you
profit.
guys feeling about the election coming up in Ireland?
I find it quite snaky in the sense of we've been here quite politically, like quite political games and stuff. Because since Simon Harris took over, he's been continuously saying, "Oh, we're running till February. We're running till February," and then obviously today he confirmed that he's going to dissolve the government and look for a vote in on November 29th. I
Hmm.
think the government have played a blinder in the last 2 years in regards to the kind of now this is my own personal opinion, their non-action of far right bigotry in the country. I think they've let it play out, and I think it has suited them brilliantly in regards to polling. Like if you look back 2 years ago, Sinn Féin say we're 36% in the poll. They're now
Hmm.
21% in the poll. So
Yeah.
they've lost that 15% probably on immigration. And the government are just Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael are rubbing their lips with it because their inaction has worked because working class people were calling Sinn Féin traitors, and they're not even in government, which so that doesn't even make sense. Do you know what I mean? So, but the
Mm.
government weren't coming out to say, I'm not saying suggesting that they should have come out to defend the comment of Sinn Féin are traitors because why would they? But at the same time, they're this softly approach with far right protests at direct provision centres completely inactivity in trying to police that. The softly approach, as we've seen, didn't see it. So many arson attacks, lack of people being charged for it. It works to their advantage that the working class are fighting amongst themselves, because let's face it, Fine Gael aren't really bothered about working class people. I think they've done enough scandals over the last 4 or 5 years between children. I was looking back actually on my Twitter from the last election, and I'd compiled a list of their scandals, which included, which was close to my heart. I was born with spina bifida, but the children's scoliosis waiting list, that was a pain point for me 5 years ago, and it's after getting worse 5 years on. So,
Really?
yeah. So, like, there's still a waiting list of over 400 children trying to get corrective spine surgery. That is, it's disgraceful this day and age. They talk about child protection and stuff, but when you look at those stats and those records, it's absolutely embarrassing. But people aren't going to vote for that. People are going to vote for immigration. People are going to vote. And housing is the number one topic in Ireland at the moment, but immigration has kind of swept into the top three. And the government are being populist with immigration, in my opinion. So I think Simon Harris I think the government will be the government going for the next 5 years. I think they probably will get rid of the Green Party. I don't think the Green Party will survive, and they'll probably make up the Green Party with independents.
Right. I need to do a lot of research. I need to do a deep dive in the coming weeks, and I'll admit that I check in and check out of Irish politics. I'm not so much in the inside baseball at the moment, so a lot of study to do. I might be sending you a few questions.
Absolutely, send away. I'll be very leaning towards a socialist mindset, but sure, look,
it's like what I said to you guys in the summer, and I was laughing at myself in many ways, but I really did mean it. That I do find it kind of pathetic that I do need to do a lot of research ahead of this Irish election, and in the same month, I'm looking at Sam going like, "Oh my God, the comments he made about Puerto Rico. There's 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania. Why do I know that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, why do I know that? And it's
need to know that.
Ridiculous, And I have a lot of work to do ahead of the election in the country I'm from, and I find that a little bit pathetic. I won't lie.
Yeah, well, I can't vote this time around, so I'm not going to do any work or any.
Why?
I'm away, so I can't. Yeah. So I don't really care what. No, obviously I do care.
Are you away like in jail or something? Like why?
No, just like I won't be at home to vote. So because we don't
have postal votes over here. Postal votes are only.
Yeah.
We have to apply before this Sunday if you want a postal vote, and you have to get a signature from your employer to say that you're out of the country working. It's pathetic.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
sorry, one thing I thought was so fascinating, and this is jumping back to America now, is that I went for dinner with 5 women that are all American about a month ago. And I had no idea nor appreciation for the fact that in Massachusetts, you can arrive to vote without ID.
Yeah. The voter ID, and again, why do we know these things, right? Why?
Yeah.
Voter ID in America is such a contentious issue. There are people who are trying to actually protest and disrupt, essentially, votes by turning up to voting booths or voting centres in California and saying, "Here's my ID." And they're like, "No, that's not necessary." He's like, "No, check my ID." Like they wouldn't vote until their ID was checked because it's become such a polarizing issue around ID checks.
Everything in the US is just so polarized, isn't it? And I think it's because people live in echo chambers, whether it's one or the other. And I feel like for a long time, like I always tried to listen to and watch everything. Like I watch Fox News, I watch MSNBC, I watch everything because I feel like otherwise I won't really understand. And it's wild. Like it's not a different spin on the same story. It's literally a different planet. But this election, I found that it wasn't the difference between right wing and left wing mainstream media. It was the difference between you were either watching TV news or you were on social media.
Social media,
Big time.
Yeah.
It was just two different planets completely.
The biggest thing I didn't realize. I remember watching Michael Moore documentaries when he was making them quite like all those years ago, and I remember he's from Flint, Michigan, and he said all those years ago that there's still no fresh running water in Flint, Michigan. And that's still the case in 2024. That's mental.
Yeah,
That there's
yeah.
no fresh running
But
water in the state in America.
I think it's interesting in the sense of America is such a contradiction for me, and I find it a fascinating place to live because there's many great things about it. You know, we're very happy living here, but there's just some absolutely wild things as well. It's like, I'm going to make it as simple as possible. Like, it's a bottle of ketchup has like 3 times the amount of sugar. You know, I mean, it's the same brand, like it's Heinz ketchup or whatever it is. It's the
Yeah.
same thing, but they allow this. I mean, I was here for 2 months before somebody turned to me and said, "Oh, make sure there's no hormones in your chicken." I was like, "Sorry?" They're like, "Oh, you need to get hormone-free chicken." I was like, "Oh, of course." And then I started going to restaurants and I'd order chicken wings and they were the size of a fucking chicken breast. And I you like, "That is not possible. Like, that's
No, it's
actually
not
not,
possible.
what have you put in this?" It's like
But
a
sure, do you ever watch?
bodybuilder of a chicken.
Yeah, do you ever watch
It was just,
do you ever watch MasterChef USA when
no.
they're picking their food and from their makeshift kitchen in the studio, and the bright colors of the fruit and veg are amazing, and the size of them, and the chickens are like, as you said, bodybuilders, the
Yeah.
ducks, it's crazy. And I remember reading up in it, and it was about all the artificial stuff that's in fruit and veg, that the reason why there's such a huge big tomato is because it's artificial.
Yeah.
Like, what?
But lads,
It's just a fascinating place. And like women get a couple of weeks of maternity leave. You get 10 days holidays every year, annual leave. You know, the divide here is really, really uncomfortable. Like, you know, I mean,
The
don't get me
American
wrong.
dream.
Well, there's a mind-numbing amount of wealth in the country. Like sometimes Sam and I
yeah,
will go to a basketball game and we will get the cheapest tickets and we're up at the back. And I say the cheapest tickets, I'm talking like $150 a ticket on a Tuesday night to sit at the back of a stadium.
the garden.
And I
They're
always just
terrible
think, I'm
bus
like,
accent.
you'll see full families that are courtside on a Tuesday night. And I'm like, who has the money to drop like $5,000 to bring all their kids for what is not a special event?
No.
Yeah.
And you think about that, and then you think about the divide in the country, and it's staggering. Like it
Daggering.
is.
Here, I've a friend in a family. One of my dad's close friends emigrated to Queens, and he is married to American Filipino woman, and they live in
Mhm.
the kind of immigrant kind of estate in Queens. But his two kids, probably 3 years in the difference, 20 and 17. And
Mhm.
for high school, so he is a paramedic with the fire department in New York, and she is a nurse in the private sector. And he paid for high school, so secondary school in Ireland, 5,000 each a year for the two kids to
Mhm.
go to high
Yeah.
school. And it was a kind of a high school that might have got great results with sport and stuff. So he was like thinking, maybe if the kids want to be good at baseball, and they were doing everything, basketball, baseball, they were doing everything. And then he was home there in March, and I was asking how his eldest is getting on in college. So he wants to be a nurse like his mother, and he said it's good. It's costing me a bit, but it's good. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Because I said I've obviously heard of college debt in America, and a lot of Americans go to the grave with
Mhm.
college debt. And he said, well, he got a scholarship. He got 50% off the scholarship. And I said, so what is his fees now? And he said, well, for 4 years, it's $106,000. I was like,
I know.
what? He said, yeah, so it'd be 212, but he got off it, got a scholarship, so it's only 106. So the two of them, one's a private nurse, one's a paramedic. He had to get a tour job.
It's
And then his
wild.
car insurance for him, his wife, and the kids is because they had a couple of minor crashes, something like 32,000 quid, that thousand
Mhm.
dollars for both of them.
Jeez.
Like, so
I mean,
I
on
mean,
the same
three jobs in
on
one household.
on the same point, but a much lighter note,
Yeah.
I was chatting to a girl who's from Boston back in January, and she was talking about getting Botox. And I said to her, I was like, out of interest, how much is Botox here? She was like, $1,100. Now, plus tip, $1,100. I was like, listen, Brooke, book yourself a flight there, go to Shannon, have a lovely weekend on the west coast of Ireland, get your Botox, wine and dine yourself, get back to Boston, and you'll save about 300 quid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eleven
Everyone.
hundred plus. I love that there's a plus a tip
Plus tip.
for
Plus
a
tip.
Oh,
cosmetic
don't get me started
person
on a
to.
tip. We have to do another episode on tips. I can't even,
Oh,
I
Yeah.
can't cope with that. It's just ridiculous.
I, I'm
unbelievable.
I'm just insanely jealous that you get to spend your Tuesdays watching the Celtics. That's
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, yeah.
um
Yeah, that is lucky to be fair.
it's a nice way. Like I mean, Tuesdays are kind of dull anyway, so it's a nice way to spend a Tuesday evening.
Agreed.
And in terms, lads, of the steroid chickens and Bobby Kennedy Jr. is going to fix it all. He's
Yeah.
going to make America healthy again. Um, Hilary, before we let you go, Booked In is absolutely brilliant. You've had some great guests on it.
Oh, thank you so much.
You said that you are a history person. Please tell me, do you have any good history ones coming up?
I do actually. I have, I'm speaking to Ben Macintyre on Monday. So he wrote a brilliant book about Russia called The Spy and the Traitor, and it was like an international bestseller. But I'm actually going to be chatting to him on Monday about his new book, which is called The Siege. And I'm getting into it at the moment, but it was a part of history I actually had no idea about. And it was about the a hostage crisis in the Iranian Embassy in London in, I think it was April 1980. And already I've learned so much like about the dynamics in Iran, um, the different people that were in control, the impact it had internationally. And it's just a part of history I had no real appreciation for. And I will say that I feel like the fascinating thing about this podcast series for me is that you'd be surprised with, when I do these history conversations, the amount of connections you can draw. Like, for example, I had Roy Carroll on, who wrote Killing Thatcher, and I thought it was absolutely one of the most fascinating things ever. And, I learned so much about how that Brighton bombing in 1984 nearly wiped out the British government. And I spoke to Roy Carroll about how in 1979, like months after Margaret Thatcher came into power, Lord Mountbatten was murdered by the IRA off the coast of Ireland. Then recently I had an interview with Andrew Lowney. Now, he wrote a book about the Mountbattens, and all I can tell you is it is absolutely explosive. And some of the allegations that are made in the book, and again, it's like that's another connection to Mountbatten, but all those 3 episodes teach me an awful lot about Margaret Thatcher's reign in ways that I wouldn't have necessarily understood if I just read a book about Margaret Thatcher. And so that's been the kind of the unexpected joy of this series. And it's just, you know what, some of these are heavy history books. Some people don't want to read the book. I hope that it's just kind of a light, easy conversation people can listen to and come away with some interesting insights.
Yeah.
I'm using it to build me like, because my problem is I buy books and it takes me so long to get around to reading them that it's about a year later. Like, and audiobooks are brilliant for helping me get through it because I'm driving 3 hours or I'm in the car or whatever and get a couple of chapters done. So audiobooks are class. But the Killing Thatcher one I thought was brilliant, and I've got the book now, but I haven't started it, being honest. But yeah,
it's brilliant.
But yeah, if people want to know more about that, it's Booked In is the podcast, but it's News by Hill on Patreon is it Patreon or Patreon?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Patreon.
We'll go with Patreon.
Patreon, yeah. It's probably Patreon in the States.
Probably. But Hilary, thank you again for being so generous with your time and helping us
So
try and make
generous.
sense of all the madness that's going on over on that side of the pond. And yeah, look, we'll probably give you a shout around January 6th, thereabouts. You know?
I was going to say between January 6th and January 20th, the inauguration. I look forward to our catch up in the new year. But honestly, guys, I can't tell you how much I loved chatting to you guys in the summer, and I was really looking forward to this. I can't believe November's come already, but you guys have a lovely way about you. It just feels like such easy conversation. Like judgment free. We just chat about it. You don't feel like you're kind of working with a script. You're just kind of hashing out different theories, and you guys balance each other out so well. I honestly, I got such a buzz when you asked me to come on. So thank you so much.
She's so sound, isn't she?
Absolutely. A very redeeming chat with Hilary there after her intro.
Yeah, she's brilliant. That's so easy to listen to. And as you said about her pod, it's excellent.
Yeah, and she actually did so her podcasts are absolutely class in terms of like she speaks to the authors of books about, and does it in a way that, really accessible and just a really good chat. but she done a kind of election type dive there. Came out this morning. Well, as we're recording, it came out this morning. And again, like that, just really insightful, really useful. I do like, unlike you and I, she does play the middle, and she plays the middle absolutely perfectly in terms of sticking to her journalistic credentials. Um, it's news without an agenda, whereas you and I are very much an agenda with news. So, you know, look, I think the reality of that election result is that, we're just gonna have to watch and see how everything plays out over 4 years, and we will absolutely be talking to Hillary more and more about that.
And it's funny because I referenced speaking to American mates, and one of my American friends, Jess, was saying it's funny because the benefits of Biden's tenure will only be seen in the next 2 years. And that's what usually happens because presidents usually need 8 years to get their kind of whole policies over the line and enacted. And you can't really get um, the taste of, they'll get the benefits of Biden's economy situation, say, in the next 2 years. Which I was kind of begging the question, can Trump extend the term in some
No,
ways? Do you think he'll try? And because he has spoke about it.
I don't think so. No, I don't think he will. I don't think one, he'll be 82.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I know, but like you talk about the fanaticals in his camp.
no, I honestly I don't like. I think what we've done, and I kind of mentioned it last week. I made a very clunky point when we talked about this last week, where I referenced the shift of the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Um, what it more is akin to is an oligarchy. What's happened is the creation here, or more so just the fruition of billionaire power now controlling politics. That's
Yeah,
what this is.
it
This,
is.
from every aspect and from every angle, this is an oligarchy, right? This is now, like, the only thing that's stopping Elon Musk is the fact that he's not born in America and all that kind of crack, right? Same thing.
Yeah, he was an illegal immigrant, is it, Dan?
Well, listen, that's a whole other conversation. But like, realistically, I think this is now what we're going to see emerge over the next few years, is the billionaire influence and the evolution of a GOP Republican Party becoming. I mean, like, we're going to call it a MAGA movement, we're going to call it MAGA, whatever. But I think the reality is somebody's going to have to succeed Trump.
Yeah,
And it,
JD, surely.
I don't know. May like I mean, like, in terms of Trump within the next 4 years, croaks it, or something becomes incapacitated for whatever reason, then that's what
Does Kamala run again?
I don't think we'll get an answer for that.
Well, see,
Um,
she'd have to go through primaries, and I don't think she'd have the confidence because of this performance,
no,
even
I
though
think she
she was
would.
only.
If anything, I think she would. I think, like, build back stronger.
What about Tim Walz? I think he was really good.
Not for president. No, not for president.
Uh, P.
Pete
Bugamy.
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think the problem there, though, is,
Was it a mistake not making him VP, the runner
look, I mean,
for for Pennsylvania? Like,
in hindsight, you could argue everything was a mistake. You could argue this part was the biggest mistake, that part was the biggest mistake. I think, there's no point in opening that can of worms. I think I would love to see Pete Buttigieg have a go at it at some stage, because anytime I've seen him in an interview, I think he's been absolutely brilliant. Um, but is America ready for an openly gay man to be president? I would say, based on the balance of everything at the moment, no.
no,
Um, his background, I mean, transport secretary is probably the most prominent office he's held. Is that prominent enough to be president?
no.
You
The
know,
fact that but see, the voters don't think about those things. It's a lot of it is a personality contest, you
well,
know.
yeah, I mean, well, I don't know about that, because this year, this one, it was the economy and it was democracy.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
the
fair
two
enough.
biggest issues. So anyway, look, we're going to put a fork in it. And I absolutely promise people listening that we will not talk about American politics again for at least 20 minutes of the next episode.
Yeah, it depends on what happens.
Yeah, exactly. It really does depend. But it's all going to play out very quietly now, I would say, until he's in. Like, you might hear a couple of things about he's going to do this and he's going to do that. But I think the reality
He's probably going to pardon Vince McMahon from all his fucking scumbaggery.
I mean, he's definitely going to pardon a lot of people. I mean, here's a question, right? We'll end on this. Does Joe pardon Hunter? I
Oh,
would. I would.
yeah.
A million, like, I'll give him my life to service. I've done everything by the book. I've said my prayers. I've drank my milk. I've taken my vitamins. All that
It's
kind of
really
crap.
corrupt that people can that they can pardon people, isn't it? Though
It absolutely is. But I mean, the other side, Trump has made murmurs about like he'd consider pardoning Hunter Biden. Would you want to be beholden to the man you hate more than anything else in life? No.
I'd find it very funny if Trump pardoned Hunter.
But this is exactly so. This is the situation Joe Biden's left with, right? So does Joe Biden pardon Hunter?
I think he probably will. Is there talks of it?
I don't think there's direct talks of it, but there's certainly people who are asking the question and
Does
saying
Vince
like,
does Donald Trump pardon Vince McMahon, considering Vince's official wife is part of his cabinet?
can he pardon him?
I actually
Are,
don't know.
are they state or federal?
It's going to be federal. There's a federal investigation regarding him.
Well, this comes down to then how much do you believe Project 2025, right? Because if he does what they say they're going to do, the FBI and the CIA are going to become part of the presidential powers, and the
But
separation of
see,
powers will be no more.
that's the scary part of all of this.
And we didn't even talk to Hillary about that, about the fact that
No.
basically he's going to have right. He already owns the Supreme
Bring
Court.
Hillary there. Will you get her back on?
Should have got her back on. Yeah, right. He already owns the Supreme Court. The Republicans are going to control the Senate, and at the time of recording, all the votes aren't in, but it looks like they're going to control the House as well. That like the Separation of Powers Act is fucking useless when the president holds all the keys and all the power. He's like fucking Thanos with the Infinity Stones right now. That like, so it's going to be very interesting / scary to see what happens. But buckle up, the next 4 years are going to be wild.
Right, Dan. Until next time, where can people listen to us?
Anywhere you get a podcast, lads, WTS Pod, or search WTSpod.com. Don't need to search that. That's a direct address. You can just type it in. Don't know what I said. Anyway.
Anyways.
And yeah, look, at WTS Pod. We're also on Instagram and YouTube, and you can ask Alexa to play us. And if you ask her nicely, she might even do it. I'm at Danjo Murray. He's at Mergamania. Hillary is at News by Hill. I'm struggling to end this one, Mero. Put me on my misery, will you?
Clear eyes.
Full hearts.
Bye, Lou. See you next week. Bye.